Hello and welcome. I'm Alex Proimos, Head of Institutional Content and Investment Magazine, and this is Market Narratives. This show is a series of unorthodox conversations with thought leaders influencing the world of fiduciary investors. For more related insights and analysis, please remember to check out our website, investmentmagazine.com.au, and subscribe for a free email. And with that, please enjoy this week's episode. Hello and welcome, everyone. Today I'm joined by Laurence Parker-Brown, who will actually be the host of the podcast today. It's a special podcast. I'll leave it to Laurence to maybe kick off.
Well, there's so much to cover, Alex. Let's begin with where you started out, around about 18 months ago, 100 episodes plus. What did you have in mind to set it to create for the Market Narratives audience? Now that you're 100 episodes in, do you think you achieved what you set out to do?
It's always tricky to know where you go when you kick off this adventure. When I started Market Narratives 18 months ago, the whole premise was to re-engage the community, the asset owners, the consultants, the managers at a time when we didn't know when the next event would be. And, digital events was always a potential, but digital events were always going to be a bit of a challenge for the business. And so the idea of the podcast and the long form podcast of sort of 20 to 40 minutes was a way to break some really interesting stories and also keep the community going and at least getting a feel for how everyone was coping with the environment, at least hearing what people are doing from an investment point of view. And so to that end, I think we really did that. And I think we're 116, 17 episodes in and covered asset owners, consultants, managers. And to that end, I think it's been an incredible ride and many people have had a chance to speak up who probably may have been too shy to speak at an event. And they've taken the opportunity to speak on the podcast and really give some insights.
So you've touched on the breadth of stakeholders that all had a voice. The academics, the managers, the asset owners and consultants. What do you see each of them bringing to the community?
Well, everyone's got a lens. Everyone's got a particular bias. And so to that end, the whole premise of Market Narratives and having so many different stakeholders in the conversation hopefully allows people to make up their own mind. We do live in a world that is very much influenced by so much information. It's very hard to deal with. And here's the opportunity to speak with leading academics, consultants, asset owners, managers, and for people to sit in their own time, which I think is unique, whether it's on the weekend or after hours or early morning or going for a walk and listen to people talking about what they do best and for people to immerse themselves, without distraction and listen to a conversation and hopefully give themselves a new view on something that they've been doing before.
You've achieved a lot in the 18 months. And I know Apple are obsessed with data and information. They've sort of notified you in the top 5% in terms of reach, in terms of audience. So that's 95% that aren't at that level of Market Narratives. Why do you think that is? Is there anything that you're particularly proud of in terms of how it's developed and how it's grown?
Look, I think the biggest thing is perseverance, right? I think perseverance is a big part of any success in anything, whether it's a podcast, whether it's events, whether it's media. So half the challenge is just getting through the conversations and building up as many conversations as you can. And people can start to take interest. And the whole premise of building so many different stakeholders in is that every single stakeholder has a different audience. Whether it's local, it's an international group, whether it's an academic, they've all got their own friends that will at least listen to them. And so by bringing so many people together, you immediately bring that audience to the podcast. And to that end, you start to get downloads. I think we're 30,000 and counting. And to that end, that is I think quite notable. As a podcast series and a success in a pretty short amount of time at a particularly a time when there was a huge amount of podcasts flooding the market.
Now, it's typically you and your guests. Sometimes, you've had two guests, but that involves an awful lot of preparation, a lot of breadth of knowledge. And it's also a real art form to try and convey a conversation and make it appealing to a broad audience. How has your skill and your style evolved in these 18 months?
I think I've become more confident to just push the boundaries. And, as an academic, you've always got to be ready. You've got a lot of students that are constantly willing to challenge you, challenge how you think, ask questions. And I've used that knowledge and that experience to apply to the podcasting, and you just get more confidence to keep pushing and be a really active listener. And I think one of the things that you really learn as you listen to your podcast back in the editing process is, oh, I should have asked that better. I should have done that better. Maybe I didn't ask in the correct way. You become very self-absorbed in how you ask questions, but that's how you improve. And I think for many of us, we don't have that many opportunities to sort of have self-reflection because the world's moving so quickly. And this is an opportunity for me to learn the style and become more comfortable in it, and also be curious. And I think in this world, particularly in the investment world, you've got to be continually curious. You've got to be challenging the narratives. You've got to really push. And that sort of also comes back to the name Market Narratives, which was a premise around really a lot of stories that are being used in investments today. And you've got to think about the narrative. What is the narrative telling me? Should I be believing it? What should I be doing differently?
So you referenced just earlier, Alex, that sometimes you're interviewing someone, you might in 6 months look back on it and think, oh, I wish I'd asked this, or maybe seen how that could have been handled in a different light. If you look back at whatever it is, 120 basically episodes, if there was one that you could magically re-record or transform or potentially interview again, what springs to mind?
I think Sam Cecilia, the CIO of Host Plus, and I really have a huge amount of support for Sam. I think he's done a great job. He had a very hard time last year and copped a lot of flack. And to that end, I asked him a lot of questions about that time. Probably could have pushed harder, but it was always a tricky time because he trusted me to do the podcast. We agreed that there'd be no editing whatsoever. It would be just completely the raw conversation that was had. So to that end, investors could really listen to how Sam answers questions. And I think I would have loved to push him harder, but at the same time, you got to respect his trust that he's given to me.
Now, you've spoken to so many interesting people, and I know that they all had a different voice, a different perspective, different contribution that they've added to the community. But imagine you're pitching to a brand new listener or one of the audience today. They hear this and they want to share it with their community. If they were to start somewhere, and I know this is difficult, putting you on the spot, what's the one episode you think a brand new listener should start with?
I think they got to listen to Mike Green. I don't know what episode that is, but it's one of the later ones, somewhere in the 90s, I think. Mike Green is an incredible talent. He's done a huge amount of research on the impact of passive investing and what it does to markets. And I think if you're going to be an allocator in this world, if you don't understand the impact of passive flows on markets and pricing, and the algorithms that all connect up with passive flows, I think you're really going to be in for a rude shock. And Mike is an incredible talent, used to run money for Peter Thiel, worked at Logica Funds, now at Simplify Asset Management. Absolute pleasure to speak to. And I really appreciate people that are willing to do the deep dive research, particularly in an area that wasn't really thought of a lot, historically, this market microstructure.
You've spoken to all these iconic names, built relationships and friendships and reignited old ones, but there's always the future. I'm curious if there's someone that you could wave a magic wand and bring into the playlist, and you'd get the next guest that would be an absolute dream for you. Who would that be?
Oh man, there's so many people that I've interviewed. So to that end, I would love to go back and interview some of the existing people, because I feel that my knowledge has grown. After so many conversations, I've grown my knowledge gap. My knowledge has increased so much that I want to go back. I don't even know if I'm ready to go to the new people, because there's just so much I'd like to go back and talk to people. And I know a lot of other podcast series keep going back to existing guests over time, and we really haven't done that much in the case of Market Narratives. There was a few people that we did speak to a couple of times, but the vast majority was just one time. And I think that you can learn a lot from existing people and also get a real feel for how these people change. Markets change, narratives change. And how they think about their portfolio and how they go about investing will change due to different circumstances. And so tracking that, I think, is really interesting. There's plenty of other names in the investment world that I'd be happy to reach out to. But some of the most interesting people are the ones that aren't so popular. and I don't think Mike Green was such a popular guy not that long ago. There's plenty of other people that you can think of that are big names, like Jeremy Grantham at GMO, who's fantastic, but he's everywhere. Many people have heard him. And so to that end, how do I go about finding the unique talent that doesn't get a voice? And that's really what I'd love to do. And it's not easy to find sometimes.
So get in touch if people are looking for that episode. This is a farewell episode, so a big announcement. What's next, and what's your leaving message for this audience of Market Narratives?
Oh, look, I've got to do a kickoff and a thank you to everyone. As I said, 30,000 downloads is something that really has blown my mind. I probably would have never thought we'd get that in such a short amount of time. But obviously, there's a lot of interest in and trust in me as a interviewer, and listening to how I ask questions and how curious I am. So to that end, I want to firstly say thank you to people, and there's many people that have been listening and sent me emails and messages along the way. So thank you to them. What's next? I'm moving to an asset owner, name to be determined. People will find out very, very shortly. I probably may do podcasts again. I'd love to do it. It'll all depend on the current situation with my new employer. But in any case, I'd love to go and kick off another series at some stage, because I think there's just so many conversations that need to be had. And the podcast series in their long form situation really allow people to get their voices out in a really clean and unedited way. And I think in this current world where there's just so much fake news and story spinning, to actually hear the actual person speak and listen to that conversation unedited is just so important.
Well, there we go. I wish you well, and I'm sure everyone else does. Very well done on an outstanding contribution to the institutional investment world.
Thank you very much, Laurence, and thank you very much for your time working with me over the past almost 2 years. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you for joining us. All views expressed on this podcast are subject to change and do not necessarily reflect the views of Connexus Financial. This podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be relied upon as investment advice.